If you've ever wondered if you're using the full capacity of your online tree at Ancestry, you are in the right place. That is what we are talking about today, which is how to navigate your Ancestry tree like a pro. I'm Crista Cowan. I am the corporate genealogist here at Ancestry, and I've been here for now 22 years, and I was a customer for years before I was an employee, and I was a professional genealogist before I came to work here, and now have been able to teach you all how to do family history for almost 2 decades. And it's one of my favorite things that I get to do every week is show up here on these Wednesday virtual events and share with you some of my favorite tips and tricks about how to do family history, how to discover stories in your family tree, and sometimes, like today, how to do something like navigate the family tree platform. So that's what we are going to cover. We're going to spend about an hour together today. And let me give you a quick overview of what we're going to cover so that you know what's coming and can kind of gauge if you need to ask additional questions. First, we're going to talk about tree views, so the different ways to view your tree. Then we're going to talk about tree settings. Then we're going to dive into the person profile page and walk through some of the features there. So it's just going to be a walkthrough of a family tree. We're going to use my tree as an example, and we are going to make sure you know what all of the little buttons and features do. It's a really important thing to understand because, as I suspect, some of you are probably not utilizing the full capacity of family trees on Ancestry. Now, one thing I do want to make really clear right up front is that family trees on Ancestry are free to build. You do not have to have an Ancestry subscription to build a tree, to host that tree, to access that tree, or edit that tree in any way. Your subscription pays for access to the historical record collections on Ancestry and some of the more advanced features. So as we go through this today, I'll make sure I always point out what is free and what is included with different subscription levels. If any of that's not clear, you have any questions, of course, you can pop into that Q&A and ask the members of our social support team there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So this is my family tree, and currently I have it in what we call horizontal or pedigree view. The tree view button is over here on the top left of your tree view menu. Now, if you're using Ancestry on a mobile device, it's going to be in the bottom right. Okay, so top left on a web browser, bottom right on a mobile device. But you do have different options for tree views, and the top one there on that list is horizontal. This is my preferred tree view for a couple of reasons. This is me. These are my parents. These are my grandparents, my 8 great-grandparents, my 16 great-great-grandparents, and so on, right? That is what we call pedigree view. I like this because of, well, actually 2 reasons. One, I do a lot of DNA research, and I only inherited DNA from these people. I didn't inherit DNA from my dad's sister or my mom's second cousin, or right? Like I didn't inherit DNA from all my relatives. I only inherited DNA from my ancestors. Sometimes we use the word direct ancestors, which is actually kind of a redundant phrase because the word ancestor literally means these are the people who have the word parent in their relationship to me. So parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, those are your ancestors. Those are the people that you inherited DNA from. And in pedigree view, those are the only people that you are going to see. Now, we only allow you to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations at a time when you first start in pedigree view, but you can expand any one branch of this family tree by just clicking on this little arrow here to the side. It will then expand it another 1, 2, 3, 4 generations, and you can keep walking your family tree back like that, okay? The problem, of course, is that it gets so big that you have to shrink it down to being barely readable to be able to see it unless you're using a really big monitor. Which brings me to another point about tree views. Wherever possible, I would highly encourage you all to use multiple screens. So genealogy, oftentimes we need this pedigree view or this map of where we are in our tree, and yet we want to still be working on something else, but we need to be able to refer back and forth to those two things. Well, this allows you to do that. So I'll tell you a little bit about my setup. Here at the office, I use a laptop for everything. So I don't have a standing computer, like a box computer. I just have a laptop. Here at the office, when I show up, I plug my laptop in to my monitors. And so here at the office, I've got one really big widescreen monitor, and then just kind of like a regular size monitor, and then my laptop screen. So I'm actually working on 3 screens. Then at night, I go home, I take my laptop with me, I plug it in there, and it actually, I don't have a lot of desk space at home. So my laptop tucks under my computer stand, and I just use 2 like normal sized monitors. When I have to travel and I'm in a hotel room with nothing but my laptop, it's gotten to the point where I feel a little bit hampered because I appreciate having multiple screens and having that extra real estate. Because just being able to anchor myself back in exactly where I am in the family tree at all times is really important. Now, of course, most web browsers have the ability to have multiple tabs open at a time. So if I wanted to go look at somebody in my family tree, rather than click through to view that, almost always what you would see me do if you were watching me do family history is I would right click on it, open it in a new tab. Because then, at the very least, I can just toggle back and forth between this profile page and where he is in the family tree. Having that ability is fantastic. And then, of course, you could also do split screen if you're working with just one monitor so that you've got half of it on one side of your screen and half of it on the other. Different browsers allow you to do that in different ways. So as far as like just navigating information and the tree as your tree grows, it becomes, I think, important to start to think about what that looks like. So that's how I do that. Now, you'll notice on some of these people in the tree that the little arrow to open up another generation, let me zoom in so you can see it a little more clearly here. And go back up here. That sometimes it's a solid kind of gray circle. I'm using the dark view of family tree. And when we get into tree settings, you'll see that you can have other options. But you'll see here like it's a solid circle, and then see here on Mary how there's no circle around the little arrow unless I move my mouse over it. And that's because Mary does not have parents. And so that's a quick visual indicator, right? Same thing up here. Deborah does not have parents. But anybody where the arrow is dark, that means you've got additional information behind that. Now, sometimes what'll happen as you're navigating your tree is exactly what just happened to me. It shifts the screen so that I'm always looking at the next set of things that I want to look at. But sometimes it'll shift things off the screen. So again, over here on your tree viewing menu, this bar over here, at the bottom, you have those zoom in and zoom out options that allow you to do that. You can also click and drag anywhere on this screen, and that will allow you to kind of recenter things. And then my favorite thing to remember when it comes to tree navigation is you can always go home. Right? So if you click the little house button, it will always take you back to the home person in the tree and just kind of recenter things for you. So that is a little bit about just kind of navigating around your tree in what we call horizontal or pedigree view. Now, if you have any specific questions about that, we're going to try something a little different today. I will be explaining, I know I'm already seeing some things pop up in the chat, but I will be explaining all the icons and imagery on this screen. Never fear, you don't have to ask that question yet because we'll get there. But if you have specific questions about actually just tree navigation, as I'm going through this, feel free to pop that into the Q&A or the chat. Now, next up on this list of tree view options is what we call vertical view or family view. It takes that pedigree chart, it flips it on its head, and so instead of going from left to right, we're now going from bottom to top. So you'll be there in the center at the bottom, and you'll notice that there's kind of like a black box instead of one of these white boxes. That just means that I am currently what's called the focus person. That's all that means, that this tree that I'm viewing is based off of me. I could at any time switch that and make someone else the focus person. So I could come here and I could view my dad's family tree, and it will just shift things a little bit because now everything will be in relation to him. And now the black box will be around him. I did not just make him the home person. If I click the home button, it's still going to go right back to me because I am the home person in this tree. We'll take a look at tree settings in just a minute, never fear. But that black box just means while you're in family or vertical view, that is the focus person. Now, one of the things you might have noticed is when I switched to view my dad's family tree, all of a sudden a lot of information looks like it disappeared. It didn't disappear, right? It just keeps information hidden until you decide what you want to look at. Because what happens in family view is you have the opportunity to look at everybody, and it gets really overwhelming really fast. And so we want you to choose who you want to look at very intentionally. So again, you'll see little arrows. Let me make my screen bigger so you can see them. You'll see little arrows. If I want to view Stephen's 5 children, I just click the little arrow, and there we are expanded. There's my siblings and the spouses of my 2 brothers. Okay. If I want to see my dad's siblings, I just click the little arrow and it pops out. There's my dad's older sister and her husbands. There's my dad's younger sister. There's my dad's youngest brother and his wife. I could pop these arrows out and view Brad and Mary's children, or I can drag the arrow up here. Here's my dad's parents, my grandparents. I can pop this arrow out. There's my grandpa's sisters and spouse. Here's my grandma's siblings and spouses, right? So you just start to navigate around the tree. Information, sometimes people go to view a tree and they think somehow they've lost information. You haven't lost information, okay? Pedigree view will always show you 5 generations, and then you can expand it 1 branch at a time. Family view will always be focused on one person, and that person will have the little black box around them, and then you can expand information as you need to. Now, the reason you might want to expand information, like there's never going to be a time probably where I would have everything open at all times, because we'll watch what happens as I start to do this. There's 2 things that happen, right? One is it has to start drawing lines to figure out how to connect everybody. 2 is it starts to use up memory and resources in my web browser. And so then all of a sudden I've got like all of this information expanded. And then you'll also notice way down here in the bottom left-hand corner, do you see like this little map? Every one of those tiny little dots is a person in my tree, and it's just going to keep getting bigger and bigger as I add information. So I might notice that my web browser slows down a little bit. I might also get lost in the tree a little bit. Now, we do give you relationship guides for where you're at in the tree. So like these are my dad's great grandparents, right? And so I can kind of start to navigate around that, but it just keeps going. Okay. So be intentional when you use vertical or family view. I don't use it very often. There are a few use cases where I might use it, particularly if I'm trying to look at a large number of siblings or grandchildren in a particular family all at once. I might open the tree of that particular person and then look at their children and their grandchildren. That works especially like when I'm working on a DNA case where I'm trying to figure out how I'm related to a particular DNA match or figure out how to place them in my family tree. But beyond that, I spend most of my time in this horizontal view and then duck in and out of the profile pages. Okay, so that is how you navigate around horizontal and vertical view. There is another view here, which is called fan view, and we'll recenter it back on myself here as the home person. Zoom out just a smidge. Okay, there you go. Now, fan view, when you go into fan view, you're going to have a little fan view setting that pops up here on the top right-hand side that allows you to decide how many generations of your fan view you want to see. For those of you who aren't familiar with this, here is how you kind of read this. You or whoever you focus the tree on is the person in the center. Then you're going to have father and mother, and then you're going to have the 4 grandparents and the 8 great-grandparents and the 16 great-great-grandparents. So you just read it in like an arc around. I like fan view because it helps me to very quickly see where the holes are in my family tree. Now, I've been doing family history research for about 40 years, a little over 40 years now. And my parents and aunts and uncles and people in my family did it a long time before me. So I inherited a lot of information. And yes, I still have brick walls. There are still going to be holes in my family tree. Some of you, this may be a perfect fan. Some of you, it may start to look like the Death Star a little bit. So fan view is an interesting way to kind of just jump in and view your tree and see where your holes are, where you might want to focus. Much like when you're viewing in vertical view or horizontal view, you can also recenter your tree or refocus your tree on any person. So if I right click on this great grandmother of mine and I just go to view her tree, it's going to take her and it's going to put her now at the center. And then these are her parents and her grandparents and so on. So you can navigate your way around the tree that way. And of course, if you get lost, you can always go home and it will recenter the tree on the home person in the tree. Okay, so that is the fan view. Again, all of these are available even without an Ancestry subscription. You can navigate your way around your tree, utilize these different views. And as a professional genealogist, I use all of these different views for different reasons. Primarily, I'm sitting in that horizontal view. I'm using that vertical view, particularly looking at a generation of children, grandchildren, sometimes great-grandchildren, when I'm trying to work on DNA matches and figuring out how they might be related. This fan view I use when I just want to kind of see where the gaps are, how complete a family tree is. That's super useful if I'm maybe just wanting to go work on something and not sure where to start when I sit down to explore my family tree. It's more important to me when I'm, again, doing DNA research, when I want to see how complete a family tree is, because tree completeness is one of those important concepts to know about when you're working on DNA. Now, the next view on this list, or on this tree view menu here, is the list view. A list view is simply an index of the people in your tree. Now, I hit a really unique milestone this week. I've been working on my tree, like I said, for 40 plus years now, and my dad and I work on it together a lot, so he also has access to my tree. When we go through our tree settings in just a few minutes, you will see how you can take your tree and share it with other people. And so my dad is an editor on my tree that I own on my account. My mom is an editor on this tree, so we're all kind of working together. And we added our 100,000th person to our tree this week, just on Sunday. It was kind of an interesting milestone. Every Sunday night, my dad and I get on FaceTime and we work together for 4 or 5 hours. And I generally do the data entry as we're working through our DNA matches and making those discoveries. And we usually call it quits about 2 a.m. And it just so happens that when we stopped at 2 a.m. this week, we had just entered the 100,000th person into our family tree. Now, lest you freak out, okay, know that I do not have 100,000 ancestors, because remember, ancestors are the people you descend from, the people whose DNA you inherited, the people whose relationship to you can be described by using the word parent, grandparent, great-grandparent. But if you go back to any one of those ancestors and start tracing their descendants, you're going to very quickly end up with a lot of people in your tree, especially when you get to the living people. So for example, I only have 2 grandparents on my father's side, but they had 4 children and they had 12 grandchildren. And there are now 27, I think, great grandchildren. So that like from those 2 people in just a few years, there's almost 100 descendants that are going to, probably be there. You go back another generation and that number gets exponentially bigger. As a matter of fact, one of the people in my tree that I was just looking at yesterday is Samuel Mulliner. Samuel was born in 1809 in Scotland, so just a little more than 200 and, 200, almost 220 years ago now. He has more than 14,000 descendants. And that's just the people that we've identified, right? There are probably people we haven't figured out yet. So 18 children, 98 grandchildren, and now here we are generations later. So as you start doing descendancy research, that those numbers can get really big really fast. You go through an obituary and add the 20 surviving people, or you go to a family reunion and ask everybody about the babies that have been born in the last 5 years since the last reunion, you're going to quickly be able to add some of those people to your tree. So what that means is that while I have 100,000 people in my tree, a large percentage of those people are living people, right? And so let's talk briefly about privacy on Ancestry before we dive into this list view. So on Ancestry, you have an option of making your tree public or private. A public tree on Ancestry just means anyone with an Ancestry subscription can see the dead people in your tree. So while it is free to build a tree on Ancestry, you cannot freely see all of the family trees that other people have built. There is one exception to that, and I'll share that in a minute. So public tree on Ancestry just means anyone with an Ancestry subscription can see the dead people in your tree. Private trees on Ancestry mean that anybody that searches for someone in your tree will know that that tree exists and know that you have some information about that person in your tree. But if they try to view your tree, they will hit a little wall that says, if you want to see more information, you need to contact this user and ask for permission to see their tree. So that's what private means. Still, people will know information exists. Things will get hinted out of your tree. If somebody has your grandfather in their tree, they might get a hint that you've saved a photo or a record, but they can't come and view the tree unless you give them permission. So that's public, private, and then there is a third level of permission called private unindexed or unsearchable. Private unsearchable means nobody but you will even know that that tree or any of the information in that tree exists. So in all cases, and especially with those public trees, information about living people is automatically privatized. So if you're on a computer where you can do this, this might be kind of a fun little exercise for just a minute. But what any one of you can do is you could go right now on Ancestry and you could search for my grandfather. His name is Fred Ross Cowan. He was born in 1922 in San Francisco, California. You would probably find my tree. As a matter of fact, my tree would probably come up first because the way that we show you search results for other people's trees is based on how many source citations are attached to that person. And so we kind of rank things. Do they have a lot of sources? Do they have a lot of relationships? And then, so 20 people might have my grandfather in their tree, but my tree would probably come up pretty close to the top. You could go and you could view my tree right now, because my tree, if you have a subscription on Ancestry, is public. But you would not see my father or my mother or me. You would simply see the word private, because any people who are living in your family tree, Ancestry automatically privatizes all of their information, their name, their dates and places, any photos or documents you've uploaded or attached to them. So you'll see that my grandfather has a son, but you won't see anything about my dad. And you could click on my dad and you will see that my dad is married and that he has 5 children. You could see the family structure, but you would not see any of our names or any dates or places or photos. Now you can see it right here on my screen because it's my tree. So you can always see the information in your own tree, but nobody else can. So that's just a little bit about tree privacy. And if you're not sure what your tree privacy settings are, again, over here on your tree navigation menu, in the middle, there's 3 little dots. 3 little dots on most websites usually mean there's more information hiding under a menu that we couldn't just include on the screen. And so you'll see tree settings there. And when you go to your tree settings, you will see privacy settings. And those privacy settings are where you can see whether you have your tree public or private. So a public tree, that's the default. That is my tree. Here is how you would switch it if you wanted it to be a private tree. If you do switch it, just make sure you click Save Changes or it won't actually save it. And then if you also want your tree to be unindexed, you just need to check that box. Okay. Again, make sure you save your changes. Now, I, of course, want to keep my tree public. We'll get back to these tree settings in just a minute, but I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that as I have added all these living people to my tree, I'm doing it because I'm trying to track DNA matches. I'm trying to keep track of descendants of ancestors for family reunions. I'm trying to make sure I understand the stories and who has the pictures and where I can, what cousins I can contact to maybe collaborate with as we explore our shared family history together. But that information, even though my tree is public, is privatized information. Okay, so here on this list of all people, there's a couple of things you need to know. One is nobody's ever going to page through 100,000 people in a tree. So Ancestry has created specific filters that will allow you to navigate your list of all people. You can search. So I could come in here and I could just say, I want to see everybody with the surname Cowan in my family tree. And it would create the list of the 237 people in my tree that have that surname Cowan. And I could go through that list that way. Okay. So that is one way you could do that. If you are looking for, maybe you knew somebody in your family tree was named Evelyn. You can't remember if it was her first name or her middle name. Well, I have 198 people in my family tree with the name Evelyn. I could quickly scroll through that particular list. So anybody can search. Again, that is freely available to anybody who has a tree. You can search by given name, you can search by surname, or you can search by both, like just find anybody with that name. Now, if you have a really large tree like I do, and you want to see, for example, everybody where the surname starts with the letter R, you can just type in an R and it just jumps you to the list of, the 4,000 people in my tree who have a surname that starts with an R. These are people with double-barreled surnames in my tree, so that's why they show up there at the top of the list. So you can navigate your list of all people and use that like an index to quickly jump to information in your tree. Or you can use filters. Now, some of these filters are freely available to anybody who has a tree. And some of these filters are only available if you have Ancestry Pro Tools. Okay, so as I go through these, I'll make sure you understand which are which. It is pretty clear because the things that require Pro Tools have the word Pro next to them. Okay, so let me just quickly explain Pro Tools. I have done an entire video about Pro Tools where I walk through it in detail, so I don't want to spend too much time here. You can find that and all of our other Wednesday virtual event videos if you go to ancestry.com/education. You'll see the previous videos on the page. You'll also see the upcoming events and can register to attend those live if you would like. So anything that says Pro Tools is going to allow you to quickly jump to specific groups of people in your family tree. So remember, we talked about ancestors. In my tree of 100,000 people, only 815 of those people are my ancestors. And here's the list of them. Some of you are going to ask the question about why some of these people have dotted lines or blank lines as surnames. That's because these are women whose maiden names I do not know. And so rather than leave the field blank, or rather than erroneously put in her husband's name and maybe cloud the fact that I should be looking for her father, I put in 5 underscores. 5 underscores creates that nice little blank line. I'm consistent about 5 because that way then they all show up in the index together alphabetically by their first names and keeps me knowing that I'm missing a piece of information. So I can see all of my direct line ancestors. I could use these filters to just look at my paternal side of my family tree. I could look at people who are the end of the line, right? So as you go back in your family tree, where does your tree stop in certain places? I could look at just my direct line ancestors who are end of the line. So you can combine filters. It becomes really useful the larger your tree gets. One of the things that I sometimes hear from people who are brand new to family history or who have been doing it for just long enough that their tree has started to get big enough that they start to get a little bit overwhelmed. And they start to ask, how do I split my tree? How do I divide it? I would never, ever encourage people to do that. I am a huge fan of one tree. If I am going to build a tree, I am going to put all of my ancestors and all of their descendants in that one tree. There's a few reasons for that. One is because I can only attach my DNA results to myself, and I have to have a tree that has all of my ancestors in it to be able to make the most effective use of my DNA results. So I would never create a tree with like dad's side and mom's side, or one tree for each grandparent. There are people who do that because sometimes they get a little overwhelmed with the amount of information. But using this list of all people and these filters is going to allow you to navigate this basically database of information that you've created in a really elegant way. Using those tree views very intentionally, who you're focused on, that's going to help you navigate that tree view or that vast amount of information. So one tree, I'm a huge fan of it. I strongly encourage you to just keep going with that one tree. The other reason is because as you start doing family history, the more people you get into your tree and the further back in time you go, the more likely it is that you may find your parents or grandparents were interconnected in some way. Not necessarily that they were related to each other, but sometimes that members of the family married members of those other families. And if you have everything in one tree, you're more likely to recognize those duplicates and be able to merge them than you are to do the work twice if you are working in 2 separate trees. So I strongly encourage you to come in here and to explore these filters. Now, the filters that are available to everyone are going to be here under my tree tags. We'll talk about those in just a minute. And then there is also now new network tags that are available. Networks are available to everyone that has Pro Tools or anyone who has an Ancestry World or All Access subscription. And again, I've done an entire video on networks that you can find at ancestry.com/education. So we won't spend too much time on that here. So tree filters, searching, that's all going to allow you to navigate this list and to find the people or information that you are looking for. Now, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have an integrated account with Family Search. And so some of you may also see some additional icons that show up if you have an Ancestry and Family Search integrated account. And that's what this icon is here. Okay, back to my tree view. Okay, we've gone through horizontal, vertical, fan, list. With Pro Tools, there are two additional ways to view your data. You have charts and reports, and those are just different ways to create reports that you can print out. And then you have a tree mapper. Again, I did an entire video on Pro Tools, so I don't want to spend any time on that today. If we continue to go down your tree menu over here on the left, after all of your tree views, you're going to see the gallery. And we'll be talking a lot more about the gallery tomorrow in a bonus virtual event when we talk about Ancestry Preserve. So I threw in a little extra event this week. And if you want to register for that, or if you're watching this later on YouTube, you can find that where we'll go walk through that gallery. You can do a find in tree. So rather than going to the list of all people every time, you can just pop out this little find in tree sidebar, and you can search for specific people in your tree this way. Just type in like a first and last name, and it will show you all the people that have that name so that you can quickly navigate to them. There is a hints icon over here. There is a DNA icon over here. There is that family search icon over here. And then there is your tree menu. So let's dive back into these tree settings for a few minutes. We already talked about privacy settings, public or private. Let's talk a little bit about tree info. You can name your tree whatever you want, and you can change that tree name at any time. So if you started your tree and you had it named something, you can go in there and you can edit it. I call my tree the Cowan working tree. Cowan, of course, is my last name, but I made it the working tree because there are kind of two schools of thought among professional genealogists. Some professional genealogists will only put information into a family tree once they have come to a conclusion that this person and all of the information about them is accurate and fully sourced and has been run through the genealogical proof standard. I'll be doing a series on the genealogical proof standard later this year. So the idea, though, is they call them a conclusion tree, or I'm only putting information in here once I have reached a conclusion about the accuracy of this information. The other school of thought in professional genealogy is that family trees should be active workspaces. And that's kind of the side that I fall on, obviously. And I'm not saying either one is right or wrong. I just, because of the way that my brain works, I have ADHD, and I get overwhelmed when there's too many places with too much information. So I like to keep everything as simple and consolidated and streamlined as possible. And so that's what works best for my brain. So I just put everything in this tree as it is a work in progress. So you will find information in my tree. I never would put information in my tree that's knowingly wrong. I would never just park information. I always have some evidence that this information is accurate. But I might, for example, add a list of children from an obituary, and then it might take me time to come back to that and go through and document, yes, these really are all the children. Somebody didn't throw in a random in-law or I'd go back and document the information about those children's births and who their spouses are, right? Like that information sometimes is a work in progress. So I call my tree the working tree so that anybody who comes across it knows that this is an active work in progress, not that I have created a tree of conclusions. You can also add a description here. And again, this is editable at any time. Now, over here in this side panel, so again, we're in the tree settings info. You can determine at any time who you want the home person to be. You can change it at any time, okay? But you want to set a home person because that's, remember, when you get lost, you can always go home. That's what will happen every time you hit the home button. Also, if your tree is public, that means that when anybody else goes to view your tree, that's where it will always start. So any one of you, again, you could come to my tree, you could hit the home button, it would go to me. Now it would just say private because I'm still living, and my parents would just say private because they're still living, but you would see the rest of my tree because you would be able to get to that home person. Now, there's another little setting here that is really interesting, and sometimes people don't understand it, and it is called who you are in this tree. And in this case, it's my tree. So I have set myself as the who you are in this tree. You might have a different person as the home person. But this setting right here is going to allow you to do something kind of fun in your tree. And so you may find yourself wanting to change this setting sometimes. Here's what it does. If you go to the profile page of any person in your tree, right underneath the death date, I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can see it. Right under the death date, you are going to see a relationship listed. If there is no relationship listed, that means one of two things. Either you do not have a who you are in this tree person set, or the person that you are viewing is somehow disconnected from that who you are in this tree person in the tree. I can at any time, anywhere in my tree, click on this and it brings up a little relationship calculator that shows me, here's my dad, my grandpa, my great-grandpa, my great-great-grandma, and her father. Now, when you get deep into your tree, sometimes these relationships get a little crazy, right? Fourth cousin, spouse of the fourth cousin 2 times removed. But you can click that always and it will show you the path. And that will show you who you are in this tree person is set as. So if at any time you ever want to figure out how any 2 people in your tree are related to one another, all you have to do is change this who you are in the tree to one of those people, and then go to the profile page of the other person, and it will show you their relationship. So that's a setting you can play around with a little bit. Just make sure you always set it back to what you want it to be for consistency's sake as you work. Now, you can also adjust some other things here. You can export your tree from this page if you need a GEDCOM file for, like printing out your family tree with a print service, or if you want a GEDCOM file for uploading to a software program, if you want to use some other software program, you've got the ability to export your tree, or if you just want to export it to create a backup file. One of the things that professional genealogists sometimes do is we create family trees for other people as we're doing that work, and then we'll export that tree. If they take that GEDCOM from Ancestry and upload it back to Ancestry, then all of the records and images and sources that have been attached will remain attached. But a GEDCOM file that is taken from Ancestry and uploaded anywhere else is just going to be a flat data file. So no pictures, no images of documents, none of that. Okay, so that's where you're going to export the GEDCOM file. And then if for any reason you ever need to delete your tree, maybe you were doing a test, maybe you had a sandbox, maybe you just got started and now you're realizing you need to kind of start over, you can delete your tree. Just know that can't be undone. So you want to be really careful. And it's not anything you can do accidentally. Like you click that delete button, it walks you through a couple of screens, making sure you really want to do that. So that is in your tree settings, your tree info. Now let's talk a little bit about tree invitations. I mentioned that trees can be public, private, or private searchable. A public tree on Ancestry just means anyone with an Ancestry subscription can see the dead people in your tree. Private means people know the tree exists, but they would need permission to see the tree. And private unsearchable means nobody even knows the tree exists. In all 3 cases, you can decide as the tree owner to share your tree with anyone you would like. And like you don't have to have a subscription to have a tree on Ancestry, if you share that tree with them, they do not have to have a subscription to view that tree. So they would have to create a login, right? They would have to have their own email and password to log into Ancestry, but they do not have to have a paying subscription if you have shared your tree with them. When you share your tree, there are 3 levels of permission. The first one is just what we call a guest, right? All they can do is they can just view your tree. You would use a guest access, for example, if someone does not have an Ancestry subscription and you just want them to be able to see your tree. You could give them guest access. If your tree is public, basically everybody with an Ancestry subscription already has guest access. If your tree is private, you would have to share it in order for anybody to see it. And if your tree is private unsearchable, nobody knows it exists unless you share it. So guest is the first level of access. They cannot edit anything. They cannot change or delete or add anything. They can only see your tree. The second level of permission for tree sharing access is contributor. So they can upload photos and stories. They can add information to the tree, but they cannot edit or delete anything. And then the third level of permission is editor. Now you want to be really careful about that because an editor can do anything in your tree that you can do. And so you want to be really careful with who you share editor access to. So in my case, I have shared my tree with both of my parents and I have given them both editor access. So here on this list, you'll see, right, here's my dad. Oh, here's my dad, and he has editor access. And here's my mom, and she has editor access. I've shared it with other people, my brother, one of my cousins, some organization that was doing some videos for us and was using my tree, one of our pro genealogists, my sister-in-law, another cousin, right? So I've shared my tree with a lot of people and I've given them guest access, but only my other account, myself, and my parents have that full editor access. And y'all, my mom didn't even have editor access when I first started. I only gave her collaborator access. I was only going to allow her to add things to the tree until I was sure she wasn't going to delete or screw anything up. And she's a little technologically challenged sometimes. Love her dearly. She taught me how to use a spoon, so I try not to make fun of her when I have to teach her how to use her iPhone. Okay. But the idea is that you want to just be really careful who you give editor access to. Now, in all cases, you get to decide as the tree owner who can and cannot see the information about the living people in your family tree. And you can edit that or you can revoke or add that access at any time. So when you invite people to your tree, you decide what their role is, and then you decide whether or not they can or cannot see living people. Now, again, as professional genealogists, very often we will work on trees together. So in this case, right, I have my tree. I shared it with Kyle, who is a professional genealogist with Ancestry Pro Genealogist. I did that because if you watched the video last fall, he was working with our Heritage Travel team to provide me and my dad with a virtual travel experience. And so he needed access to my tree in order to see where in Germany my dad's grandmother's family was from and could plan out the itinerary for that particular experience. And so that is as pro genealogists, we often share trees with each other and work through some of those. And so you can do that. And then you can, at any time, remove that person's access, or you can, like I said, remove or add the living person access to the tree. So all of that information is in your tree settings. I encourage you to be familiar with them. I encourage you to go and look and see who you've shared your tree with, what level of access you've given them, if you're still comfortable with them having that particular level of access. Now, before we wrap up with the profile page walkthrough, I do just want to address some of the icons on my tree. In this tree viewing menu, you are going to see an option here for tree viewing options. Tree viewing options, you can turn any one of them on or off. So in vertical view, do you remember how when I had my dad and it said Steve's parents, Steve's grandparents, Steve's great-grandparents, right? That is because I have these relationship line labels turned on. You can turn them on or off. I also have, for family or vertical view, always view all spouses. So sometimes when somebody is married and you're climbing up the family tree, you want to just see the spouse that that child is descended from. But sometimes if that person was married 2 or 3 or 5 times, you want to see all the spouses. And so you can turn that on or off. Now, there are also DNA settings for TreeView. I manage a lot of DNA tests, so we're going to look at my own test, and you'll notice as I switch back and forth from my dad's test to my mom's test to my test, the little icons on the tree change. Okay, that is because this little icon, let me make it bigger. Okay, there we go. Okay, this little icon, it's dark blue and it has 3 little heads. That is the ThruLines icon. So every person in my tree who is an ancestor has a ThruLines icon. Not as useful when I'm on horizontal view because those are just my ancestors to begin with. But as soon as I switch into vertical view, now all of a sudden there's all these people on the tree and I might get lost really easily or quickly. And so having those ThruLines icons on just kind of helps me follow where the ancestors are in my tree. So that is the ThruLines icon. There are also icons for connected DNA matches. So anybody who has taken an Ancestry DNA test, so in this case, my grandma, make it bigger. Okay, this little light blue DNA helix icon. If I click on that, here is my grandma and her DNA match to me. Because from my DNA match list, I said, connect this person on my match list to this person in my family tree. These are the same person. And so I wanted to be able to toggle back and forth, but it also adds an icon so that I know that this is a connected DNA match. There will also be Ancestry suggesting possible DNA matches. So if Ancestry has a suspicion that this person on your DNA match is the same as this person in your tree, they'll put a little white on the blue on white version instead of white on blue on white version of that little DNA icon in your tree so that you know that you might possibly need to go explore that and connect that. Now, you might also see in my tree little red icons. Those are little comments. So when your tree is public, or when anybody has been invited as a guest to a private tree, they can leave public comments on your tree. So remember, they can't edit or change or delete or add any information to the people in your tree, but they can comment on any profile page. And you can do this on anybody else's tree too. And those comments show up with this little red icon that lets you know that you've got comments on that person that you might want to go explore. And again, you can just turn those icons on or off. And then I mentioned I'm in dark mode because that's how I prefer to view my tree. You can switch it to light mode if you prefer that. So that's where you're going to do that. All of that again is in your tree viewing options. So those are these icons. The little green leaf icon, of course, tells you that that person in your tree has hints that you might want to explore and review. And then I have just added little emojis. I've only done it on my 8 great-grandparents. I did it as a form of color coding because these are the 8 groups that I use for my DNA matches. And so you'll want to kind of think about if you have DNA and you want to start creating custom DNA groups. I've done an entire video on how to create those custom groups. It's a DNA matches video that you'll find there on the education page at Ancestry. And I explain exactly why I used those particular colors in that particular order, but I just dropped them as little emojis into the suffix field of those people in my tree so that I could quickly see what those custom groups were in my tree. Now, I've also added one other emoji to my tree that you might notice, and that is on immigrants. I've dropped a little ship emoji into the suffix field for those immigrant ancestors. Okay, in our last couple of minutes, I just want to walk you through a few things here on the person profile page. So every person in your tree has a profile page, and really, like I said, I use that horizontal or pedigree view as kind of my home base for navigating my tree. There are some occasions where I use some of those other views, but the profile page is where I'm going to spend the vast majority of the time. It's the place where I'm going to do all of my research about this person and their family. So most of you should be familiar with this page, but the anatomy of it is like this. You have a facts tab. That facts tab is where you're going to see the timeline of information that you have added about this person. You can show family events, which means it will show you when their siblings were born and died, when their parents died, when their children were born and died, if they were born and died within their lifespan. So you can toggle on or off family events. If you have added alternate names for this person, you can toggle on name and gender so that it will show those alternate names right here at the top of the timeline. But generally, I just leave those off. The other filter you may see show up here once in a while is what is called alternate facts. So sometimes some of you save a record, and instead of deciding that this person has this birth date, you add all the possible birth dates. And so you end up with alternate birth dates. I don't have that very often in my tree because I tend to be the kind of person who, even in a working tree, I want to come to a conclusion. A person is only born once, a person is only dies once. So I only want one birth date and one death date for every person in my tree. No matter how many different records say different things, I'm going to use all those records to come to a conclusion about when and where that person was born and attach them to that one birth fact. So you may have alternate facts here under your filter. You won't find that very often in my tree. Here is also where you can add facts, and you can add basic facts, birth, marriage, and death, or you can add any number of other facts, and there's this long list of things that you can go through and add. Or you can create a custom fact, and you can give that whatever title you want if you don't find one in the list that meets your needs. So that's the timeline. Here in the center is where you're going to have your sources. So these are the hints and the search results that you've attached to your tree from Ancestry. And clicking on them will show you what pieces of evidence that record, or what facts that record is a piece of evidence for. You can also add sources, and we'll do a deep dive at some point in the future in one of our videos about adding sources. Over here on the right, you're going to see their relationships. If they have 2 parents or 4 parents or however many parents, sometimes people have biological parents and adopted parents, or like you can add additional family members, okay? And you'll see them over here. You can toggle the siblings on or off, and you will see the spouse and the children, or sometimes multiple spouses and children. Now, the one important thing that you may not know about that I want to make sure you know about before we end today is the edit relationship screen. So when you add relationships to your tree, the default for all parent-child relationships is biological. But as we know, all families are messy. Families have always been messy. That's nothing new. Families come in all different shapes and sizes and configurations. And so we have given you the ability to add alternate or additional parents, additional spouses, additional children, and the default is biological, but you can come into this edit relationship screen at any time, and you can edit the nature of both parent-child relationships and relationships where the default, when a spouse is added or a partner is added as spouse, if they weren't actually married, you can also choose another option there. So again, that is the edit relationship screen. So that's kind of the anatomy of the person profile page. That's where I'm going to do most of my work. And as we go through some of the series of videos that we'll be creating at our virtual events on Wednesdays over the course of the next few months, having kind of this foundational understanding of how to navigate your tree views. That's where we spent the bulk of our time today, understanding your tree settings, and then that profile page is where we will really dive in as we start to talk about things like the genealogical proof standard and some of the editing and cleanup things that we do in our family trees. And that's what we'll be covering in the next few months. Well, that is all we have time for today. Hopefully this was a useful hour of your time. If you need to come back and watch it again, I find that repetition helps me a lot, just to catch some of those things. But most importantly, I want you just to feel confident to dive into your tree and start clicking on buttons, right? There's very little you will do that will mess anything up. And remember, if you ever get lost, you can always go home. Well, go ahead. Before you leave today, I would love it if in the chat you would let me know one new thing you learned today. That's super helpful for me because it helps me know if I'm pacing these correctly, if you're learning new things. That's really useful for me to get that feedback. I think it's also useful for you to type out what you learned. You're more likely to remember it. Until next time, I'm Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.